Starting off this countdown, we have Clifford Olson. This dude was a very controversial and well-known serial killer here in Canada. In fact, he was given the name the Beast of BC. He took the lives of 11 individuals in the early 1980s. Now, over the course of his life, he had a number of run-ins with the law and was put behind bars a number of times when he was a teen. His first victim was Christine Weller, who disappeared and was later found on Christmas Day. She had been stabbed and strangled. Now, what makes his case so controversial was when he was caught, he made a deal with the RCMP. The deal was basically he would get paid for telling them the location of his victims' bodies. He got $10,000 for each victim, and then he would send the money to his wife and son. But imagine that, getting paid for your murders. They literally were rewarding him, which makes me sick to my stomach. In our 9th spot, we have Dr. Kitty, but don't be fooled by this doctor's name. She's not cute or friendly. Now, Dr. Kitty's real name is Jingwei Wang. She would perform plastic surgery out of her Toronto basement under the name Dr. Kitty. The thing is, she was only 19 and had no license to do such procedures, let alone did she have any proper training. She posted flyers around the city saying she does face slimming injections. In April of 2017, she got a couple of clients. One client had her face become botched from the injections after getting a massive infection. Needless to say, she was arrested and charged. In our 8th spot, we have Richard Chase, aka the Vampire of Sacramento. Why was he given this name? Well, because he was an American serial killer who would drink the blood of his victims before feasting on their bodies. It is said that he took the lives of 6 people in just 1 month in 1977 and 1978. Apparently he did this though because he thought the Nazis were turning his blood into powder through some poison, and he needed to drink other people's blood to prevent that or to counteract it. I don't know what he was thinking, but either way, he was a pretty scary dude. In our 7th spot, we have Wu Zetian. Wu Zetian was the only female emperor in China's history, but she was a ruthless one at that. Why? Well, apparently she killed her sister, her older brothers, the ruler, and poisoned her mother. Not only that, but she was known to torture and execute anyone who got in her way. Plus, she was known to force people into taking their own lives. Even animals had to fear her. This is what she said about taming a horse, and I quote, "First I'll beat it with the iron whip. If it does not yield, I'll hit it with the hammer. If it still won't be tamed, I'll cut its throat with the knife." So that right there gives you just a perfect insight into the woman that she was. Moving on to number 6, we have Jack the Ripper. Of course, you have probably heard about Jack the Ripper or Jill the Ripper, since people think that it could have been a female serial killer and maybe that's why she was never caught, because all this time they were looking for a man, you know? Meanwhile, she was a woman. Anyways, Jack the Ripper was an unidentified serial killer in London in 1888. To this day, they have never been caught. Obviously, they are probably deceased by now. Anyways, the killer would typically target women of the night who would work in bad areas in the East End of London. Some of the victims had their organs removed, and the way in which they were removed made detectives think that the killer had some anatomical or surgical knowledge. Either way, it's believed that Jack took the lives of at least 5 women, but the number could potentially be higher. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Issei Sagawa. This guy's story makes me sick to my stomach. So on June 11th, 1981, Issei Sagawa invited his friend over for dinner. Little did she know, she was going to be dinner. He ended up shooting and killing her and then began to feast on her body over the next couple of days. Apparently, he always had the urge to eat the body of a beautiful woman. 32 years he fantasized about this. In fact, he says that what he did was natural and he wants to do it again. And what's horrifying is that he can if he really wanted to, because he's a free man. So this all took place in France. When he was presented in front of a judge, he was ruled legally insane and unfit to stand trial. So they dropped the trial and sent him back to Japan with the order to be placed in a mental institution. But he didn't. Since the charges in France were dropped, the court documents were sealed, so the Japanese authorities couldn't get him. So they had no case against him and he just walked free. Not only that, he became a minor celebrity in Japan. He appeared on talk shows and did interviews, and literally made a living off of his gruesome deed. I think the fact that he's still out there and can strike again at any moment makes him absolutely terrifying. In our 4th spot, we have Leonard Lake and Charles Ng. You're getting 2 for the price of 1 for this countdown number, so you're welcome. These 2 men worked together to commit some horrific deeds. In particular, they built a bunker, would kidnap families, and then bring them to this bunker to torture. They took the lives of 25 or more individuals. In particular, they would target women. If the women had a family, they would kill the family but keep the woman alive in the bunker. And sadly, they would take advantage of them. Sometimes they even would videotape them doing this. In the end, the pair were caught shoplifting, and when their van was explored, they found bullet holes and blood in the back, so they were caught and arrested. Moving on to number 3, we have the Toy Box Killer. David Parker Ray was an American kidnapper and serial killer that took the lives of more than 50 women. Now, he was referred to as the Toy Box Killer because the women were placed inside of this soundproof trailer filled with a number of torture devices. He referred to this as his toy box. He would then kidnap women, bring them back there, and use whips, medical instruments like saws, clamps, etc., sexual toys, and electric shocks to torture them. But before doing so, he would play a very creepy recording to the women. The recording talked in detail about what he was about to do to them. So he would psychologically torture them before physically torturing them. Thankfully, one of his victims escaped and was able to tell the police about David and his crimes. In our 2nd spot, we have Carl Tanzler. Okay, this dude was another sicko. But basically, he was a radiologist that fell in love with his patient, Maria Elena, who was dying of tuberculosis. But that didn't stop him. Carl ended up digging up her corpse when she died and then fixed her body. He replaced her eyes with glass eyes and used wax and wires, among other stuff, to fix her dead body and face. He then kept her inside of his house and would sleep next to her dead body at night. Of course, it would smell, but he would spray her with perfume and rub her with oils. It took people 7 years before he was caught and people realized what he had done. And in our number 1 spot today, we have Armin Muse. Now, this one is quite the weird story. In 2001, a man named Bernd Brandes posted online saying he was in search of someone who would be willing to cook and then eat him. That's when a man named Armin Muse responded to that ad. The two then arranged how this was gonna go down. When the two met up, Brandes got drunk and took a lot of painkillers before being killed. Armin then ate his body over the course of the next couple of months. Apparently, there was even a video of him doing this, and I'm sorry for all the people that had to watch it because apparently the people who did see it said it was so disturbing that they sought psychological counseling after. Armin was arrested in December of 2002 after posting another ad explaining what he would do to willing participants. Starting off this countdown, we have Richard Kuklinski. Richard Kuklinski, otherwise known as the Iceman, was an American serial killer who was convicted of 4 murders in 1988 and another in 2003. But after his arrest, he admitted to killing at least 100 more. Now, he was given the name the Iceman because he would place his victims in freezers after he took their lives, and then he would leave them in the freezers for years. Then afterwards, he'd dump the body. That way, investigators would have a hard time figuring out the time of death. His first victim was a neighborhood bully. Richard took his life when he was just a teenager. From there, he was kinda like, oh, I like the feeling of killing, and that's what started his killing spree. In our 9th spot, we have Dorangel Vargas, aka the Hannibal Lecter of the Andes. He was given this name because over the course of 2 years, Vargas took the lives of at least 10 men in Venezuela. To make matters worse, he would eat his victims as well. So Vargas was homeless. He would find his victims by hunting down passerbys. He typically would target healthy males like athletes. He said he would avoid bigger individuals because of high cholesterol levels. He also thought they had contaminated flesh, whatever that means. Once he locked his eyes on his next target, he would bludgeon them with metal tube scraps or rocks. Eventually, he was arrested, and during his confession, he said, and I quote, "I used to eat the thighs, not the nose, ears, or hands, because they're too hard. If I saw a drunkard sleeping, I would kill him with my spear. I want to go back there and dig a big hole to bury them. I don't feel ashamed of anything. They have put me in jail for nothing. Okay, buddy, for nothing, eh? Yeah. Okay there, bud. In our 8th spot, we have H.H. Holmes. Dr. Henry Howard Holmes, or H.H. Holmes, was an American serial killer back in the 1880s. In 1886, he moved to Chicago and got a job as a pharmacist under the name Dr. H.H. Holmes. However, he was killing people in order to steal their property. He also got his employees to write him down as a beneficiary so that he would get all their money after he killed them. And then he would sell the bodies of his victims to medical schools. On top of that, he owned a house that was referred to as the Murder Castle. Basically, his home had secret passages, trapdoors, soundproof rooms, gas chambers, and a kiln to cremate the bodies. That's why they called it the Murder Castle, because you get murdered and it was so big like a castle. Eventually, he admitted to 27 murders, however only 9 were confirmed. Yet officials believe he killed closer to 200 individuals. Moving on at number 7, we have Charles Cullen, and in no shape or form is he related to the Cullen family from Twilight. This guy is sick though. He was a nurse in New Jersey for 16 years, but instead of helping his patients, he would kill multiple of them. He did so by giving them too many meds so that they would OD, or by contaminating their IV fluid bags. It's believed that he took the lives of 40 patients, but in his interviews post-arrest, he admitted to killing many more. It's crazy, but investigators think that his kill count is around 400. Now you might be like, how does one nurse kill that many patients and no one looks into these things? Well, this guy was stealthy. If people started to raise an eyebrow, he would move on from that hospital and get a job at another. Plus, during this time there was a nurse shortage, so hospitals were desperate. Finally, in 2003, the hospital was suspicious of him because his patients kept overdosing, and that's when he was caught. And now I'm scared of receiving any kind of treatment, thanks. In our 6th spot, we have Joseph James D'Angelo Jr. Joseph was a former police officer who you might know better as the Golden State Killer. But he has many other names like the Visalia Ransacker or the original Night Stalker. It first started in the late 1960s. Joseph would lurk around neighborhoods at night and break into homes. He is responsible for over 85 burglaries and 1 death during a burglary gone wrong. In 1976, Joseph took it up a notch. He then would attack and take advantage of a number of individuals. It's said that he did this to around 50 women. Then he went on to his Night Stalker phase, where he would go around killing innocent individuals. In the end, he committed at least 13 murders and 120 burglaries in California from 1974 to 1986. But like I said, he was best known for being the Golden State Killer. He would attack couples in Northern California and the California coast, tie them up, take advantage of the female, before taking the lives of both. In the end, he was caught after investigators found his DNA at multiple crime scenes. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Robert Hansen, otherwise known as the Butcher Baker. He was an American serial killer who between 1971 and 1983 abducted and murdered at least 30 women. He was given the name the Butcher Baker because he came from a family of bakers. His parents owned a bakery in town and, he would butcher up his victims. He would target young sex workers or topless dancers. He would abduct them and then free them into the woods so he could literally hunt them as they ran away from him. Hansen was actually arrested twice in 1972, once for the abduction of a woman and a second time for taking advantage of a lady of the night. But it wasn't until 1973 that his whole violent spree began. It's absolutely disgusting what he would do to these women. He even kept a map of where he buried all of his victims' bodies. Thankfully, in 1984 he was caught and sentenced to 461 years plus life in prison without parole. Moving on at number 4, we have Rosemary and Fred West. Rosemary West was an English serial killer who took the lives of at least 10 women between 1971 to 1987. She did so with the help of her husband, Fred West. Their first victim was a young woman named Anne McFall. She was a nanny to Fred's child from his previous marriage. According to Fred, he had an affair with Anne and even got her pregnant. Then all of a sudden, in May of 1967, she disappeared. Later, her remains were found close to Fred's home. The second victim was Catherine Costello, who was Fred's previous wife. She mysteriously disappeared in 1971. Later, her remains were found close to where Anne's remains were buried. Over the next 6 years, they took the lives of at least 8 young women. In 1995, Rose was sentenced to life in prison. In our third spot, we have Maxim Petrov. Maxim Petrov was a Russian doctor who took the lives of at least 17 patients. That's what gained him the name Dr. Killer or Dr. Death. So this dude would show up at his patient's home unannounced, usually when he knew their caregivers would be gone for the day. He then would check their blood pressure and be like, "Oh, you need an injection." He then would put them to sleep and go around their homes stealing their possessions. When he first started out, his victims wouldn't die. They would just wake up all groggy and they'd be fine. But in 1999, that's when he started killing. This was his 13th robbery. After putting the patient to sleep, he went around stealing things. But he was interrupted by one of the patient's family members. So he ended up stabbing her and then strangled the patient. That's when his method changed. He decided to inject his victims with a lethal mix of drugs. The mix was a random concoction so that police would think that the killer had little medical knowledge. He then would set the homes on fire to destroy any evidence. But eventually police did catch on to him and arrested him in January of 2000. In our second spot, we have Robert Pickton, aka the Pig Farmer Killer. He was a Canadian serial killer and pig farmer, hence why he was given the name the Pig Farmer Killer. So Robert would lure his victims to his farm, typically they were prostitutes, and then he would tie them up, kill them, and then run their bodies through a wood chipper. The remains were then fed to his pigs. Others were mixed in with pork and sent to friends and family for them to cook and eat. BRB, I'm just gonna go barf real quick. In the end, he was on trial for 6 counts of murder, but was suspected for at least 26 others. And in our number 1 spot today, we have Luca Magnotta. This case shook us Canadians. It's just so disgusting, and if you haven't heard of it, buckle your seatbelts because it's gonna be a wild one. On May 24th, 2012, Luca Magnotta invited Jun Lin to his apartment. He then proceeded to tie him to the bed and stab him to death. He recorded Lin's gruesome murder and later uploaded it online for everyone to see. He titled it "One Lunatic, One Ice Pick." The video was very gruesome. It showed Luca doing awful things to Lin's body. He also ate parts of his body on camera and dismembered his whole body on camera. The video ended up going viral and Luca fled. But before doing so, he mailed Lin's body parts all around Canada. His torso was mailed to an apartment complex in Montreal, his feet were sent to Ottawa, and another body part was sent to Prime Minister Trudeau, but that was intercepted before it even reached him. The craziest thing of all, Luca did this all for attention. He just wanted to be famous. How sick is that? I warned you, it's gross.
Alright, we're gonna be kicking off this list with Jeffrey Dahmer. This is one of the most twisted criminal cases that you can learn about. Jeffrey Dahmer was a serial killer throughout the United States in the 1980s. He would lead men back to his hotel room or to his home, and these men thought they were going back to Dahmer's place for some good old-fashioned sex, but unfortunately, they were about to get gruesomely murdered. Dahmer would drug these men, then strap them down to chairs, and then proceed to drill holes in their head and inject chemicals into their brain. It wasn't the drilling they were hoping for. He would record all this information in a diary, as if he was doing some sort of science experiment. He would also keep their body parts. When the police searched his home, they found a pasta pot full of human penises. They also found the skulls of his victims. Dahmer would keep them and decorate them. He would have like a little arts and crafts session. I'm not sure why he would do something like this. I don't know if maybe he was trying to sell them afterwards, but I feel like the resale value on skulls is really low. There's speculations that he would also eat the people, and that's how he was coined the name the Milwaukee Cannibal. After he was convicted, he was sentenced to 900 years in prison, and it didn't take long for the inmates to turn on him. After a few years, he was murdered in jail. At number 9, we have Leonid Minin. Some people want to make money and be rich, and they don't care who they have to step on to get it done. Leonid Minin is one of the most notorious arms dealers of all time. He sold weapons to people all throughout Africa, including the Liberian president Charles Taylor. This man helped fuel turmoil throughout Africa. His distributions of weapons led to thousands of deaths and children being ripped from their families to become child soldiers. Minin was a massive partier as well. He was known to indulge indulge in drugs and prostitution. If you're an international arms dealer selling illegal weapons, I don't think you're gonna have a moral stance against paying for sex. That's like Jeffrey Dahmer being fine with eating people but not touching pork because it's too cruel. Eventually this man's crimes caught up with him and he was arrested. When he was arrested, he had over $500 million in goods on him. At number 8 we have Mokhtar Belmokhtar. This man is head of the African branch of Al-Qaeda known as Al-Murabitun. I bet you thought these guys were eradicated. Well, apparently they just won't die. They're like cockroaches, but they know how to use social media. Belmokhtar isn't just hiding in the shadows either. With all the other attacks going around the world, it's obvious that we don't get to hear about some of the lower tier terrorists making moves. But in 2014, he tried to pull off a terrorist attack on the Eiffel Tower, and the guy is a master of building his own bombs. Well, kind of a master. He did blow off one of his own eyes with a homemade explosive. Now he's like one of those eye patch dudes, which kind of makes him even scarier. His entire plan is to build an army of mercenaries in Africa and mobilize them, and then start attacking the Western world. So far most of his attempts have been foiled, but it's still terrifying knowing that there's another Osama bin Laden wannabe trying to bring Al-Qaeda back to its former glory. And I use the term glory loosely. At number 7 we have Enedina Arellano Felix. She is known as the first ever female drug lord in Mexico. She's head of the Tijuana branch of the cartel, and this lady moves bricks and kills everyone. This section of the cartel was run by her brothers originally, but one by one they all fell, either being killed or arrested. After all the male figures were separated from the business, it was up to Enedina to step up and take control. Oh, and did she ever! She has a background in accounting, and through her business knowledge she moved Tijuana's cartel back into a position of being one of the most powerful in all of Mexico. Not only that, but after she came into power, the murder rate in Tijuana rose by 37%. You have to crack a few eggs to make an omelet. And by crack eggs I mean shoot people down in the streets in cold blood, and make an omelet I mean spread cocaine throughout North America. At number 6 we have Moses Sithold. If you're into serial killers, then this one might have slipped under your radar. He's not often talked about, but is known as one of the most brutal serial killers to ever plague South Africa. His total time as an active serial killer is a little blurry, as all the murders linked back to him took place in just over a year, from July of 1994 stretching all the way to November of 1995. Moses was a predator who would lure his victims to secluded areas, rape them, and then murder them. In that short time frame of carnage, he was able to kill 38 people. This is why the total time of him as a serial killer is a bit blurry. It's unlikely that he was only active for the year and killed that many people. There might have been murders prior to that nobody was able to link back to him. He was able to avoid detection by jumping from town to town, with his killing spree stretching over 3 different cities. After he was caught, he was sentenced to 2,000 years in jail. Something I really like about his sentence is that he has the opportunity for parole after 1,000 years. This guy better start injecting liquid kale if he ever hopes to live that long. At number 5 we have Amado Castillo Fuentes. Fuentes is easily one of the most powerful criminals who has ever lived. He was the former leader of the Juarez Mexican cartel. This guy made his way to the top through blood and cocaine. Chances are if he did cocaine anywhere in the 90s, it passed through this guy's organization. He was given the nickname Lord of the Skies because of all the planes he owned to transport his drugs. His cartels killed thousands of people, and they worked super hard to make Fuentes one of the richest criminals who has ever lived. Of course, all of the money he made is off the books, so it's hard to tell how much he was actually worth. It's not like drug lords are into filling taxes out. You don't extort a small business for all their money and then ask them for a receipt with it. But it's estimated that his worth was $25 billion. He died in 1997, and it wasn't the feds or the CIA or a cocaine overdose to bring him down. He actually died from complications with surgery. Fuentes was having plastic surgery to help him hide from the people hunting him down, but the doctor couldn't pull it off. I wonder what happened to the doctor after he accidentally killed one of the biggest drug lords in history. Yeah, he probably died. At number 4 we have Gilles de Reyes. We are going to venture back all the way to the 1400s for this psychopath. Gilles de Reyes was originally a celebrated member of the army of Joan of Arc. After his military time, I guess the taste for blood was still in his veins, but he wanted to focus on easier prey. De Reyes would start to target young boys. He would lure them back to his castle, telling them he had sweets and other goodies to give them. After he brought them back to his lair, he would mutilate and torture them for hours. It's said that he gained the most pleasure from bathing in their blood. What he would do is slice open their throats and let the warm blood pour over his body. I heard it's great for your skin. Another sickening kernel of information is that his servants were all aware of what he was doing. They would help de Reyes get rid of the bodies after after by burning them. I guess back in the 1400s, good servant work was hard to come by. Some people were like, I get my paycheck, I go home, no questions asked. I mean, I don't want to burn these kids' bodies, but I also don't want to update my resume. At number 3 we have Pablo Escobar. I can't imagine too many people don't know who this guy is. There's movies about him, songs about him, Netflix made Narcos, and not to mention an enormous amount of literature. Pablo Escobar was one of the largest drug lords who has ever lived. He operated out of Colombia and single-handedly gave the country the reputation it has today for being a cocaine mecca. During his reign, he was famous for bribing anyone who stood in his way, and if he couldn't bribe you, he would probably just blow you away with a car bomb. He became one of the richest men who has ever lived. During the height of his power, his men were spending $1,000 a week just to buy rubber bands to wrap up the massive amounts of cash that they had. At number 2 we have Jesus Ernesto Chavez. Some people are made for certain types of work, and even though this guy is probably one of the most horrible people to ever walk the earth, he was still very good at his job. Chavez was a hitman in Juarez, Mexico. He mainly worked for the Barrio Azteca gang, and while he was on trial he admitted to killing over 800 people. See what I mean? Horrible person, but definitely employee of the month. And if you're wondering how he racked up numbers like that, well, he wasn't just killing gang members. Chavez was ordered to kill 8 civilians a day, every day, just to keep the city on edge. This guy's kill death ratio is unbelievable. And for the number 1 spot we have John Mongrel. I couldn't imagine a worse fate than getting sent to a prison in South Africa. And if you were so unlucky that you would be given this horrible fate, then John Mongrel would make sure that your time there would be hell on earth. He's one of the generals of the Numbers Gang, a ruthless gang in South Africa where each person is given a number that breaks down which division they belong to. For instance, the 27s are in charge of killing prison guards. The 26s are in charge of handling money. John Mongrel's head of the 28s, who seek out and kill enemy gang members. John Mongrel was sent to prison for murder when he was only 14 years old. Once inside, he joined the gang and has been on an endless killing spree ever since then. He claims to have killed over 1,000 people. There are small towns with less people living in them than that. And I think this guy has killed more people in real life than I have killed in all the virtual video game playing I've played over all my gaming years. After famous sprinter Oscar Pistorius was sentenced to prison, John Mongrel said that if he was sent to his jail, he would kill him because he didn't want him to think he was gonna get an easy ride in prison because of his status. I can't think of a harder ride than someone murdering you.